What episode is this?
I don't know.
6?
It doesn't matter.
Yes, it does. Whatever. Okay. Go.
What's up, everybody? I'm Juan Young.
And I'm Bree.
And this is another episode of Marriage.
I'm sorry. The way you said "oh" was funny.
This is another episode of Marriage is for Adults. It's been a while since we did an episode. We're back again, and I must say I am looking pretty amazing, and Bree is looking very beautiful as well. We're looking very different. Obviously, Bree cut off all of her hair, and I'm letting my hair grow. Shout out to Bree, who not this Bree is another Bree. Elon Locksmith, who got my locks on point. Your boy is growing his locks out, but that's neither here nor there. Let's get into the episode. I think today we want to talk a little bit about the business and kind of what it's like to be married to. I think this was going to be titled Being Married to a Creative or something of that sort. Talking a little bit about uniqueness, right? Uniqueness and differences in marriage and all of that good stuff. So I guess we can start with...
Well, I feel like this episode is more of like a storytelling episode. Just conversation about like what it is. We're both creatives, but we're creative in very different ways. And so in our story, I feel like Juan embraces his creativity more in the sense that he allows much more risk to take place with it. And what? Nothing.
Go ahead. I'm gonna let you finish.
Oh Lord, have mercy.
No, go ahead. I mean, because I have a question. So
you ask your question.
Okay, let's start here. So, in what ways do you think that we're similar?
That we're similar?
Yeah.
I think our family values are very similar. Like where we put our family and our priorities. I think we both like to laugh, have a good time. I think we're both loyal to friends and just loyal people. I think those are some of like our strong similarities.
Yeah, I would say
giving. Yeah.
I would say both have huge hearts for sure. I would say we both. I think we both have a creative side for sure.
Yeah.
I think the love that we have for our families is very similar, both immediate and extended. I think the love that we have for Jalen, obviously, we're similar in that nature. I think we ultimately want some of the same things long term. Mm-hmm. I think we differ on how we get there, but and then I would say our spirituality. I mean, I think that is very. I mean, you know, our
that's our foundation. I think that is the biggest thing we have in common. That's I think our strongest tie that we have. Yeah.
So obviously, since we asked the similarities, what do you think are some of the ways that we are different?
Like you said, I think the way we see getting to our future is different. Yeah, yes and no, but we can talk about that later. Our approach to organization, structure is very different. I feel like our sense of urgencies are different too.
Okay.
Yeah, we have. I mean, even though we both like to laugh and have fun, I think we have different senses of humor.
I would agree. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not my turn.
I mean, you can agree.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I used to think we had so much more not in common than we did have in common until I started changing my perspective and kind of trying to look through a different lens. Yeah, so I think those are like when it comes to differences, yeah, those are, I feel like, the biggest ones that we struggle with. Yeah.
So when it comes to differences, let's see. How are we different? Obviously, I think Bree's. I think our upbringing was very different. So, like, our experiences as a youth were just different.
Yeah.
We have very different experiences as a youth, and which ultimately, obviously, creates a norm for us that we're used to, and that allows us to kind of revert back to kind of what we're used to, and kind of creates that baseline for us. What else I think are some glaring differences? I think. What else? How else are we different? I think our communication styles are very different.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the one I left out, is how we communicate.
Yeah, how we communicate. Like, our communication styles. Obviously, Bree tells me I'm the person who goes on and on and on.
You do.
And she's just like, get to the point. ABCs: accuracy, brevity, communication. Get to the point. Like, and I'm a person trying to, make sure that we're on the same page. I might say it 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different times, and it really annoys Bree. So I think communication. I think our love languages are different.
Yeah, I was gonna say her love language.
For sure. Our love languages are different. It's really interesting when we talk about, like, love languages and how they change, and I think that probably my love language when we first started has been fairly consistent. I would say probably Bree's have changed a little bit from the beginning to now, but I think the way that we express love and the way that we receive love are a little different.
Than each other, or different than when we first started?
Different from each other.
Oh, okay,
Yeah. Express and receive love those are some I think some things that are challenging. I mean, not challenging. Yeah, they're challenging. But I think we're learning how to appreciate our uniqueness in the marriage and really
because I think
embrace it.
I think, like, if we kind of go back to, like, when I say we talk about the business as, like, a sore point of differences, it's not necessarily the business that's the problem. When we've had this conversation, it's a symptom. It represents, like, how our differences, like, how we differ and approach a problem. So it's not that the business is a problem. It's how we both came to it and, like, dealt with, just the norms of having a business. Juan's really good at, like, vision and looking towards the future. He's like that guy that wants to make a vision board, like, sit down with glitter pens and magazines and, like, you do.
Glitter pens.
Glitter pens. So he wants to. He's really good. Like, always asking me, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Where are you going?
I was just trying to make sure the mic was on. That's all.
Oh. Yeah, like last time.
Go ahead.
He's always like, "Where do you see us in 5 years? Okay, if this is where we're gonna be now, we have to figure out what we need to do to make it to that point." And I'm very much like, today is Monday, and here's the week. I've got laundry. I got this. So it's hard for me to. I've never been the type of person to, like, really sit down and do these, like, projection goals. So I feel like that was one of our biggest differences that really, really rocked my world, at least when it came to, like, trying to run this business and look at it as the means of where it's going to project our family to down the road. I was so tunnel vision on, like, the immediate problems and not having, like, that, I don't want to say background, but maybe background's the right word, of, like, not having the practice of knowing, like, or maybe discipline, I don't know what the word is, but to really sit down and say, like, okay, this is where I see myself in 5 years. I just never really did that. It was just kind of like short-term goals, and then I was just going along with the motions. So we really, really butted heads when it came to that. I don't know. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, oh, excuse me. I mean, I think that's why I always wanted us to do goals, collective goals, because I think there's something powerful for a couple to write down goals and to see how they both are working to achieve those goals, even if they're doing them very differently.
Right, but what do you do then, though, when, like, in our situation, it's like you talked about, our family backgrounds are different in the sense of just the uniquenesses of family. So, in general, our family, our upbringing is the same, like, you know, strong family values and things like that, but every family is unique. Like, people may think I'm weird because of certain things that I do, but that's just what we did in our family, not that it's right or wrong. So then, like, so we're different in that sense. So then how do you deal with, like, that's not you? Because our problem was he wanted me to sit down and write these goals and come up with these goals, and that's just something I wasn't used to or good at. And so my defense came up, and it was just like, that's what I focused on. So then it's like, well, how do you deal with those differences to where, like, as you wanting me to write goals, but I'm, like, so defensive behind it, to get me to understand the importance of it without, like, forcing it. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I think it comes along with being able to acknowledge, like, there's areas. I think it's just acknowledging who is stronger in certain areas, right? So if you can acknowledge, like, okay, Juan is really good when it comes to vision.
But what if I can't acknowledge it?
Yeah, well, but that's part of personal growth, right? Like, personal growth, because, you know, are you willing to keep the family from progressing because of your stubbornness and unwillingness to allow God to use your spouse to move you? And because, I mean, I feel that, you know, our spouses, I believe that God has chose you, you know, chose us for each other, right? And that we are specifically supposed to be, you know, essentially, specifically, particularly. I'm just trying to use all the...
I see, to the point.
I'm sorry. But no, if God is using us to allow our spouse to grow from our experiences, then we got to allow God to do that. And I just think that it wasn't a Juan problem. It was like, you know, it was like a rebellion against God. Like, you're like, I am not God. I don't care what you say. I am not gonna. It doesn't matter what you say. I'm not gonna listen. I'm just not gonna listen. I got my mind made up, and whatever the case may be, I'm not gonna listen. I don't want to change. And I think changing and growing, there has to be some acknowledgement that there's an area that you need to grow in.
Sure.
And I mean, it's kind of tough.
It is. I mean, and like we had a conversation the other day. I forget what we were talking about, but ultimately it came down to, I feel like I had to explain to him that if I'm being stubborn in something, from my growth, I'm able to recognize that there are still moments that I'm going to be stubborn, and instead of him trying to continue to convince me, just back off. Because the way that I operate in my growth is, if he doesn't continue to push the issue, that's like right now in my being now, I get even more defensive, and it's like I almost like go toe to toe to go even more against him. So if he just backs off, it gives me a moment to like great, stop tripping, like that's stupid or whatever the case is, and then I come back to him in a much shorter period than before, to acknowledge, like, look, you were right about this. You know, I see what you're saying, blah, blah, blah. And the hopes is that sooner rather than later, when he says something, or like this goals thing, for example, that won't be my first defense. I'm trying to make these things my new normal. So I feel like too, like you said, in the growth thing, as your partner, like the one who's on the receiving end, like you have to kind of know yourself. And if you're getting defensive, just let them know that. You don't even have to acknowledge if they're right, wrong, whatever the case is. Just be like, look, I'm not receiving anything you're saying because I'm not there. And then, but that takes growth too.
Yep.
But, yeah.
So next question is, so we talked about what's similar. We talked about differences. how can the differences or similarities complement or enhance our marriage?
I mean, I think it forces growth.
How?
Well, because it forces growth. He hates when I just give surface level answers.
But I mean, I'll answer first, and I'll give you time to think. Sure.
I couldn't answer, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No.
All right. I mean, I think our similarities. I think our differences are great because I think in areas that I'm weak, Bree's strong, and in areas that Bree is weak, I'm strong. Most areas, and I think it just helps to create a very strong union. And when we talk about a unit, family unit, I think, if we're trying to be the best, versions of ourselves, I think it just helps us to be able to get to that point and really be all that God has called us to be. So, there's I heard someone ask, well, what, out of all those differences, how many of those differences do you thank God for, you and your spouse? And I really had to think about it because it's like, am I praying and thanking God for Bree's difference of opinion or Bree's differences that we have, the stuff that irks me? Like, am I thanking God for that?
What do I do that irks you?
Nothing. It's perfect.
Whatever.
But am I thanking God for those differences? Am I thanking God for putting somebody in my life who isn't just like me? And that's something I have to kind of think about. If I say that, that Bree was made specifically for me, then that means also her shortcomings and all the things that irritate me, which are just not that many. Maybe one thing she does that gets on my nerves. But that means that also was, I was built to handle it. That's one thing I'm learning, that that God, specifically, I keep saying specifically because I think it was very intentional about it. But those areas, he made me strong in those areas so I can help regrow in those areas. And I think that if she, that's why we're joined together, to be able to help her. So I can help her in those areas and she can help me in those areas that I need help with, which are, vast, so many areas.
But I think too, it requires you to grow in your faith, to me. That's how I've been able to start to understand, that I need to embrace his differences and allow them to be a reflection of me, of what I need to really just face. Because those are areas, like you said, most often our differences, the other one is stronger in it. And so I don't deal with it because it's that's just not a sign of weakness, but you're having to look at your shortcomings and try to build up on those and rely on someone else to help you hold that weight as well. And it's a vulnerable position to be in. And so I feel like if you don't really connect with God on that, your pride can really get in the way. And I think that's what I suffered from as well, not even really understanding that I was operating in a lot of pride because he would say something and it's just I'm going out of my way to try to prove that he's wrong. And it's why can't I even just have the faith to assume that maybe he knows something about it, but I'm only looking at the areas I know he's weak in and then making my judgment on all the areas across the board, so not giving him credit for those other areas that he is strong in. So I think, you really have to set pride aside, for sure, to grow in that and embrace differences. And I don't know if there are certain, even especially the minor differences, not putting clothes in the hamper will ever not bother me, but maybe it just won't totally bother me. I'll just go, ugh, instead of getting an attitude. Who knows?
Yeah, I think so. This episode really is just talking about uniqueness in a marriage, and there was a little few lines that I saw, and I wanted to read it because I thought it was so applicable. It says, "Your partner is not you; he or she is other, created in God's image, not yours. He or she has a right to be other, to be treated and respected as other." And I think that's huge. I think that we this whole idea of, oneness in a marriage, that people say I do, and then they instantly try to, like the formation process of trying to get their spouse to be them, begins, and there's a lot of frustration and headbutting and friction when it doesn't go as planned. And I think I've asked people, one of the things you have to ask yourself, if the thing that irks you about your spouse, if your spouse never changed that, like never, if that never changed, would you be willing, could you still spend the rest of your life with that person? And the answer for me is yes. And the answer for Bree better be yes.
Mm-hmm.
No, but any last words before we get out of here?
Differences can be very hard to deal with and embrace. But I feel like a good way to really deal with that is to, every time your spouse does something that bothers you or just gets on your nerves, think about it in the reverse. Like, if I'm the one doing, because there has to be something you're doing. That's just, in my mind, like, I was perfect, so I couldn't think of well, what is one thing that I do that bothers Juan, because I was comparing it to his weaknesses, because he would frustrate me about like something not being organized or not picking up or whatever the case is. And so then when I would think about it, I'm like, there's nothing that I do that could even bother him this much, because I was comparing it to that same category. It's like, I'm neat, I'm orderly, I do da 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 da. But I wasn't looking at the areas that I'm actually weak in. I was only looking at comparing it to my strong suits, which isn't fair to him. So if you can try to like flip that, because we all have areas that we're weak in. Another thing that really kind of hit home was once we had Jalen. I thought about, he's going to get married someday, and there's going to be some woman who will be frustrated with, his shortcomings, and that's my baby. I want someone to give him kindness and give him grace. And so he's somebody's baby. So I want to do the same thing. So that's my final thoughts.
So my final thoughts are, there was a quote that I saw. It is not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. And I think that the more that we are able to first recognize those differences, I think it's a process of self-exploration and just understanding self first. And I think when you have a really solid sense of self and understanding where you stand, what you believe in, and things of that nature, you can openly and I think thoroughly express those differences. Like, I think it's more, you're able to see it, and I think you're able to accept those differences, and I think celebrate those differences. And I think by accepting those differences does not mean, and celebrating them does not mean that, one of the things that always irked me, people, well, this is just how I am. I'm just this way. And it's like, it's okay. But part of growth is understanding those areas that you need to grow in. And I think it's okay to see differences and just say that they're different. I think having this idea that they're right or that they're wrong, I think that's where a lot of people get caught up. My way is the right way. Well, your way is a different way.
Right.
It's a different way. It may be a more effective way, but does not mean it's the right way. And I think, there's some people who will argue that there's some things that are right and some ways that are wrong. But I would challenge them to see those differences as opportunities for growth and opportunities for learning. And I think an open dialogue in a marriage is really important. Point out those differences. Be open about those differences, see who's stronger in those areas, and then let the person who's strong in those areas kind of take the lead in that area and let everybody learn. And remember that you also have shortcomings too.
Yeah.
And the grace that you want, the grace and the mercy you want extended to you, you need to extend to others.
Yeah.
One last thing. From a Christian perspective, I look at it like God has said. I was listening to a sermon from Bishop Omer, and he said that we are to go out and to be ambassadors for Christ. And God says that, He reconciled us and gave us the gift of reconciliation by sending His Son to die for us. And He said, I sent you the gift of reconciliation, and I reconciled you, even though you were sinners, and even though you've done some really terrible, messed up stuff. But now I send you out into the world to be ambassadors and to practice reconciliation. And so when you think about dealing with other people and reconciliation and grace and mercy, He said, yeah, I know that person might have messed up. I know that person probably did you wrong. I know your spouse probably got an attitude. But if I looked at your rap sheet and how you treat me, I'm pretty sure your rap sheet is probably a little longer. And if I can forgive you and I can, practice reconciliation with you,
we're called to do the same.
You are called to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So with that being said, uniqueness, differences, reconciliation, grace, mercy, it's all part of being married. It's all part of having a spouse.
Yep.
And going on this journey. Thank you so much for going on this ride with us. Look forward for another video soon. Share with us in the comments. We want to know, how are you and your spouse different? How do you celebrate your differences? What are some of the challenges with some of the differences you have? And how do you work through that? Or maybe you're not working through that. Maybe you're going through a tough time where y'all don't even want to talk about it.
We've been there, so let us know.
Please, let us know. Share with us. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Juan Young.
I'm Bree Young.
And this is Marriages for Adults.
See you guys next time.
Peace.